Alright, this demo is for using watercolor. So watercolor is a fairly inexpensive painting medium, and the materials are pretty simple and great, easy cleanup for this. So the first thing you're going to need obviously is a set of watercolors. So here's what I've got, and most sets of watercolors come with some kind of mixing tray, which is generally speaking the lid of your watercolor box. Alright. Crayola is fine, will work just fine for what you're going to need this for. You need water, of course, a cup of water. I'm going to use a brush, and I want something that is a decent brush that doesn't have all the bristles kind of fraying out, because that is one of the worst things to have when you're painting, is having a brush that's all frayed, and that doesn't allow you to get good control. Alright, the other thing that you're going to need is some kind of either tissue or paper towel is better. You're going to use that because you can use that to kind of blot out mistakes. The other thing I have today is some salt, just for some fun textural effects. Alrighty, so the first thing we're going to do is you want to get your brush wet, and pretty much you want to, whoops, sorry, let me zoom back out here. You just want to prime your paints. Definitely every time that I mix, I try to keep these fairly clean, and then I just want to go in here and just kind of prime them, get them ready to accept the paint, and really attach to my brush. So that's what I'm doing first, is just kind of getting the colors wet. Alright, once I've done that, oh, the other thing that's really great too is just having some kind of paper. Newspaper is wonderful. I have this old calendar pad that I use, and just something to blot my brush to help me control water. So that's another good thing to have. Alright, so today I'm going to show you a couple different techniques. One of them, the very first one, is just called wet on wet. And that's the interesting thing about colors. Right now I'm just going to kind of wet the space. That gets the paper ready to kind of accept the pigment, which is the watercolor. And when I'm going wet on wet, it just spreads a little differently. Alright, so I'm just going to put a color down. And put this bright kind of fuchsia color. So I'm going to add some purple to it. And you can see when I'm adding it wet on wet, it just kind of blends and spreads kind of easily and pretty quickly. It just kind of bleeds in. Alright. You can also do do some fun textural things that way, or just get some different effects. I can just kind of put some different colors and watch it sort of bleed out, and just makes kind of this really soft, wonderful effect. Alright, next is a dry brush. So a dry brush, yes, I do have my paintbrush wet with water, but basically I want to get as much water out as possible, so you can just kind of paint it on a different surface. You can even pinch out the water out of your brush. I'm going to use that same kind of fuchsia color again. And if you then just kind of lightly drag it, here you kind of get this completely different texture and effect. Alright. The next way too that you can mix and blend your colors that way if you want, since this project is about mixing and blending. Alright, and just come back on with that dry brush sort of on the top and see what kind of color I get. Okay, you can also, do that in a different direction. Maybe we'll try a different color here. Alright, so lots of different options on how you can use this paint. Alright, stippling, again, this is something we did. You can do this with oil pastel, but basically it's just kind of coming in and putting little dots, little mark making in this manner. If I were you and I was doing stippling, I probably would work from kind of light to dark. Okay, and just kind of adding my color in that way. Alright, so thinking about tints and shades, here I have tints over here. There's a lot of white sort of showing through. Over here it's going to be more pure hue. And then, of course, if I wanted to make it a shade, I'm going to get some black. And just kind of put the black in there and let it sort of mix in to make kind of like a shade of that same color. Alright, so that's a stippling effect, just kind of dabbing. Alright, the next step, I'm going to start with a wash first. Okay, so a wash is really what I did up top here too with the pink. But let me just put a wash of color down. I'm just going to use a yellow green to start with. And most of the time your watercolors are going to be, and again, see how it's getting kind of streaky? I didn't wet the whole space first. If you wet the whole space first, the color's going to go on less streaky. Alright, so now I've got a wash down. I'm going to wait for that to dry before I can show you what glazing is. But a wash is just a quick rinse sort of up a color to fill a quick large space. And it's always helpful to get the whole space wet first before you do that. Alright, a lift out is just basically pretty simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get a color down. Fill the space. It doesn't matter how you put the color down. And I'm coming back with just some water now to just fill the space. The other thing with watercolor too, if you really like this medium, it's worth it to invest in watercolor paper or watercolor sketch pad because the cheaper paper doesn't allow you to lift out paint as much. Alright, so let's just say I made a mistake or I want to create a textural effect. You just want to take your paper. What happened there? Anything that in there? Alright, and you just kind of lift it out that way. I can put more down. More color down. Maybe I want to try a different color now on top. Alright, and then just see what happens to control how much paint goes down. I can then lift it out again. So basically that's what a lift out is. You just put it down, and if it's too much paint, you can always lift it out, or you might want to even use that for a special effect. Alright, the other one that I wanted to just share is just a salt technique. Alright, so I'm gonna just put a wash down, a glaze down, a wash. And let's get some more color in there. Okay, and salt effect really only works pretty well if you've got some nice wet paint down. It won't work with a dry brush, for example. And I'm just going to put some salts in my own hand here, and I'm just going to kind of drop it on here, and we'll come back to that, see what that looks like. But basically what it does is sort of suck up all the water and absorbs all of your paint and water, and then it will leave kind of like these little salt traces. Right now it looks kind of dark, but once it dries, you'll be able to see what that looks like. Alright, so what a glaze is basically coming over top of a color that's already dry. So right now this is still wet, so I think I'll put my glaze over top of something different, because this is, if it's still wet, it's just going to mix and it's not going to be a glaze. So let me I'm going to put a yellow glaze over top of my stippling effect that I have here. So basically a glaze is covering a whole area with a color that has a lot of water in it, so you can still see through it a lot. Watercolor is called a transparent medium. Alright, so since that color underneath is dry, it doesn't move around. So now I've got this other really cool kind of glaze going over top. Alright, with a little gradation. Alright, so that's techniques. And you can try them in any way that you like. Just remember that it's a transparent medium, and most of the colors, unless you get a lot of pigment on your brush, is going to wind up being a tint. So you've got wet on wet, dry brush, stippling with a glaze over top. Here we have just a plain old wash over here. The lift out, using a piece of paper to lift out. And you're just going to have to try the salt to see how that looks. But right there, it's doing its work, but then it has to take time to dry. Alright, thanks for listening.